Hello, writers. Let's take some time today to talk about poem speak. So when we look at this picture of the beaver, a scientist, or, if you're just talking about this picture with a group of friends, you might say something like, it's brown with a big tail. You might say, he has big teeth so that he can chop down trees. When we're acting as poets and when we're observing the world as poets, then we want to see with new eyes. We don't want to see things the same way that a scientist sees things or that your best friend at lunch sees things. We want to see things in new ways. Douglas Florian does a remarkable job of using poem speak in his poetry. The beaver, wood chopper, tree dropper, tail flopper, stream stopper. Do you see how Douglas Florian, he sees the beaver in a new way? And then he doesn't just say that the beaver chops down trees, but instead he calls it a wood chopper and a tree dropper. Now, this isn't the way that you would talk with your friends in the cafeteria or out on the playground, but it is the way that we speak in poems. Ralph Fletcher calls this poem speak. Now, let's try it with the coyote. If you were to look at this picture of the coyote as a scientist, you may say something like, it has a thick coat of brown and white and tan fur. You also may say, it points its nose in the air when it howls. These are the ways that a scientist observes a coyote. If you're talking about the coyote with your friends, you may say, wow, the coyotes are howling really loud. I almost couldn't go to sleep last night. Let's take a minute to listen to a coyote howl. Now let's look at how Douglas Florian writes about the coyote in his poem, The Coyote. Notice how he's using poet's eyes. He's trying to describe it in a way that no one else would have described it. And he's definitely using poem speak. It won't sound like it would sound if you were sitting down around the cafeteria table with you, but it's going to sound like a poem. The coyote. I prowl, I growl, my howl is throaty. I love a vow, for I am coyote. So let's notice a couple things that he does as far as poem speak that you could try too. The first thing that I'm sure you recognize is the rhyme in this poem. Now the rhyme is with meaning, and it is to really kind of get that sound of the howl happening. He also describes the howl as throaty. This is definitely poem speak. It wouldn't be the first description that we would use as a howl, to describe a howl. It was definitely something that Douglas had to think about. Finally, I love what he does down here, which I'm sure you do too, with the word coyote, and the way that he changes the way the word looks in order to make meaning in the poem. In his poem, The Beaver, he's using these two words joined together with a hyphen. That's the small mark there in the middle. So he's calling it a wood chopper, a tree dropper, tail flopper, stream stopper. It's these two words joined by a hyphen, and then I'm sure you're noticing how each word is ending with this purr sound. It's the repetition that turns it into poem speak. This is something that you could try today in your poetry. In your notebook, you might want to include a page called Poem Speak. And on this page, you could begin collecting phrases that sound like poetry. It's an exercise that I do all the time when I'm trying to write a poem. So in your notebook, you can make a page called Poem Speak, and then consider something that you might want to write about today. So I have here a cup of hot tea. and I think I want to write a poem about it. So in my notebook, under Poem Speak, I drew a little sketch and wrote what I want to do. And then how I use this as a poet is I create a T-chart. And on one side, I make my observations like a scientist. And on the other side, I try to do poem speak. And so if I think about my cup of tea right here, if I'm just going to observe it and think about it like an ordinary, just regular kind of conversation, I might say, brown, sweet, cinnamon, striped mug. Oh, and it's hot. This is just a regular, run-of-the-mill sort of way I would talk about hot tea. But if I want to try to do some poem speak, then I'm going to try to talk about it like I would a poet. And so I might say something like, sweet smells swirl around my nose. I like to wrap my hands around the mug for warmth. You get the idea. Here, I'm setting up a page in my notebook so that I can practice poem speak. I hope that you will try this today too. Pick one thing and then set up a chart where you really try to collect some poem speak.